How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Tuesday, August 6th. Another round of stories to come on today's show around the NFL. A lot surrounding Brandon Aiyuk here in the first segment. A wave of new information and reports have hit us recently, just from yesterday, so we're going to get into all of that to start the show. Then also in the second segment, staying in the NFC, talking some more about the Detroit Lions and whether or not these two specific players can surpass the other teams in terms of weapons. Can these two players be the game changers that the Lions need in order to become the biggest threat to the Kansas City Chiefs? We're going to talk about that, and also some joint practices starting this week, some fights breaking out. Could joint practices be an alternate option to preseason games? I'm going to talk more about that once we get to that segment, and also some more topics that we have in store on today's show. But before I get started, a reminder to you guys, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make on today's episode, to please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that tip and donations link, I'm able to see your question, acknowledge it, read it out loud, and get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of the topics on today's show. It's a big help for this show, obviously, and also the network on hand. So if you guys would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with whatever question or comment you'd like to say throughout the duration of this episode. But now we can jump right into this whole Brandon Aiyuk situation that has just sort of hit us randomly out of nowhere, just to start off the week yesterday on Monday. Initially, what I wanted to talk about was how there was some inclination about the 49ers maybe considering a trade. But yesterday, everything broke down, and now the 49ers, it seems like, are turning the page and are really focusing on trading Brandon Aiyuk, or at least are more open now to do it more than ever. In the recent day, just from yesterday, we had a lot of reports from NBC, and just from now that I'm still seeing it on my phone from NFL Network, and guys like Ian Rappaport, Mike Garafolo, all bringing up a lot of different scenarios. That we're going to start off with what I saw initially, which was from NBC, from the 49ers insider, Matt Maiocco, who first said on this entire topic, as you guys can see on your screen, with what sort of kicked off everything with Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers. He said, "What's changed is that Aiyuk and San Francisco have taken longer than expected to finalize a deal after the sides nearly had an agreement months ago. And the most important part of it all," he said, "it appears more likely than ever that the 49ers are willing to make a trade. It might be up to Aiyuk to determine the next move." And then following that report, you saw yesterday how now the 49ers have a trade framework currently with the Cleveland Browns and the New England Patriots. Those seem to be the front runners, at least to start off the day, right? Those seem to be the guys that have the most in play, the most to give up to the 49ers and meet their asking price, not only for Brandon Aiyuk, for them to willingly give him up, but also for them to have enough cap space to be able to give Brandon Aiyuk the contract that he is after. And we could pretty much speculate that it is close to $30 million per year. And the Patriots have the most cap space in the league, so that makes sense. I'm sure they'd be willing to give up some draft picks because they are in that stage right now where, the roster talent maybe isn't where you'd like it to be. It could increase significantly if you have Brandon Aiyuk on your roster, and help out Drake May tremendously as well. And then you look at the Cleveland Browns, another team that made the playoffs last year. They're in a way different spot than the Patriots are. Obviously, at this point, they have a lot of Pro Bowlers, all pros on their team already. And for them to add a guy like Aiyuk, maybe give up an Amari Cooper or something like that it has been rumored, you would probably take that deal and think that's a good trade-off. And now you have a younger number one wide receiver to pair up with Jerry Jeudy and hopefully get you over the playoff hump that you stumbled over last year. And according to further reports from Matt Maiocco and also NBC, the 49ers asking price is something around that range, right? A couple first-round draft picks, or maybe just high-end draft picks, and a veteran wide receiver, or just a player of significant interest for the 49ers on the other side going towards San Francisco in order to get something done with Brandon Aiyuk, because now obviously this has all come to a point where I think the 49ers have finally realized that, it is the player's willingness to want to sign there, and Brandon Aiyuk has been pretty stubborn and pretty dead set on trying to get the value that he feels that he deserves and that he has played up to over the last few seasons. And whether or not the 49ers think that's fair or not, they might have their asking price, and Aiyuk definitely has a different opinion to what the 49ers are willing to give up. But with that being the case, I think now, with nothing really moving on, Kyle Shanahan repeating the same answer, the same updates over and over again at training camp, now it comes a point where you can't have this just be a consistent thing over and over and over again and having to deal with the media attention hovering over you, waiting for something like this, to be resolved. And now I think it's the right decision to finally at least see some progress, whether the 49ers agree with it or not, to try and at least resolve this situation, because really the 49ers, their biggest goal obviously is to win a Super Bowl. They're up until a point where now the Super Bowl is really the only thing that matters, similarly to the Cowboys almost in terms of regular season success and postseason success. With the 49ers, they've been at the top for so many years now, and they made the Super Bowl already twice in the last few years. They just need to win it now. It's coming to a point where you're thinking, what's it going to take? Of course, you're playing the Chiefs, you're playing Patrick Mahomes, so that's very unfortunate, but you were so close last year to kind of have it slip through your hands. Now that's really the main goal, the only thing that matters really, and I think this 49ers team, if you want to bring up the Super Bowl window and that topic and things like that, that is, I don't want to say it's closing like other people might mention, but it's certainly coming to a point where now you're overdue on trying to find the successes that a group like this certainly needs to have had already at this point. And they've been close, like I said. The 49ers need it as an overall roster with how talented they are. Kyle Shanahan definitely deserves it as a head coach of the 49ers, losing the last two previous Super Bowls he's in, but also going back to the Atlanta Falcons days, obviously, in that Super Bowl as well. He probably more than anybody needs this Super Bowl win, and if you're going to have this distraction just stand in the way of that, I think it might be hard to move on from Aiyuk, and you could argue that that could hurt their Super Bowl chances if that's all that they need and that's all that they're, really striving for now. Getting rid of Aiyuk doesn't really scream that you're making yourself a better contender for the Super Bowl, right? But again, I think now you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and you have to resolve this issue in some way, shape, or form. And this seems to be like the most reasonable, way of doing that. And if you can get somebody back, like I mentioned before, the Browns could potentially offer Amari Cooper. He's pretty much at the height of his career, ability-wise, skill set-wise, and everything like that. To fit him in to the 49ers offense, I don't think would be very hard. It would just add to the plethora of talent they already have. So if you can get someone like that back, it would be pretty ideal for the 49ers to do so. Same thing with the Patriots. They were another front runner. Kendrick Bourne was rumored in those talks to be heading back to San Francisco, so he's already familiar with that system a little bit. Wouldn't be the worst option in the world, especially, again, with just how talented they are anyway. And what's even crazier now, to throw another, a sharp left turn into this whole situation, is that before the Browns, or just at the start of today, the Browns and the Patriots were the two main front runners, and the report said that the Commanders and the Steelers were also potential suitors, but they were pretty much out of it. But now, as the day has gone on today, reports from Mike Garafolo, Ian Rappaport, and then Adam Schefter as well have re-included the Steelers in those talks. They've said that the Steelers have re-engaged the 49ers in discussions over Brandon Aiyuk and figuring out a trade there. So it seems like everything is just being thrown out all at once with this situation. You almost don't really know what to believe. And if the Steelers are, back into the negotiations to potentially be a suitor for Aiyuk, I saw just recently that Mike Garafolo tweeted out or reported on NFL Network that the Steelers could, funny enough, be the preferred destination of all three teams. So how does that impact, what the 49ers are able to negotiate with the Steelers? Does the fact that Aiyuk want to go to the Steelers, completely cross off the Browns and the Patriots, even though they might have better offers for the 49ers? It's a unique situation because Brandon Aiyuk really holds a lot of the power. If something was to get done and these two sides were to split, Aiyuk holds a lot of power because he would only go to the team that is offering him the contract that he is after. So if he wants to go to the Steelers, he might be willing to take a little bit less and say that he wants to accept that contract offer over the Browns and the Patriots, even though they're offering better packages for the 49ers. So there's a lot of intricate details that go into this. A lot has to do with Brandon Aiyuk, and a lot has to do with what teams are willing to give up. And if something does happen, I'll be super interested to see, which side sort of caved in a little bit more, whether it was Aiyuk giving into the 49ers' best interest or the 49ers just wanting to get rid of this situation and cave a little to Brandon Aiyuk's request of going to whatever team he may end up on. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on, something that I'm starting to feel like it could be resolved this week. I hope that it does. I'm just waiting for this to finally be over to see where the landscape lies after something like this happens. And what's the entire, joker, the entire caveat of this entire thing is that the 49ers could just not end up trading him. After all this news sort of rushes in, the 49ers could just decide to, backtrack and say, you know what, we're not trading him. I don't like these offers. Nothing's really working out in our best interest. We're going to reevaluate this next offseason or something like that. That could still happen. So everything is pretty much on the table, but now we're getting a huge influx of other information. The 49ers now willing to at least listen to trade offers, and it seems to be coming down to the Browns, the Patriots, and the Steelers. So we'll monitor that as we go out throughout the week. Hopefully this gets resolved at some point this week so we can talk about it. Maybe some news breaks today. That would be exciting. But with that being said, we're going to leave that topic there. I'm definitely not the last time we're going to touch on it. But with that being the case, we're going to head to the first break. And when we return, we're going to stay in the NFC and talk about another contending team in this conference, that being the Detroit Lions, how a breakout season from Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams could potentially put them at the top of the list for the contending teams that could dethrone the Kansas City Chiefs, in my opinion, in 2024. Their roster is very well built. They're very well now experienced after last year. I believe if Jameson Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs can have the seasons that they're hyped up to be, this Lions team could seriously be a contender to the Kansas City Chiefs. I'll get more into that when we return after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk now about another contending team, leaving the 49ers in the first segment, now talking about the Detroit Lions and two pieces of their roster that I wanted to bring up here. I've seen a lot of news and a lot of just reports hyping up Jahmyr Gibbs, their second-year running back, and Jameson Williams, again, another former first-round selection by the Detroit Lions. He's entering his third year now. And it seems like a lot of stock is being placed into these two guys that could potentially be the catalyst to making this Detroit Lions team even better than they were last year, where they made it to the NFC conference game. Now, if they're trying to get the best out of these two guys, it seems like that could really put them over the edge, according to all the hype and news I've seen about these two guys recently. And talking about them, it's odd that I didn't know this fact that both of them, both Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams, were oddly enough drafted with the 12th overall pick in 2022 for Jameson Williams and in 2023 for Jahmyr Gibbs. So very weird that both of them were drafted with the exact same pick in back-to-back drafts. But now, I guess it's not too weird because both of them are primed for breakout seasons, it seems. Like the reports from the Detroit Lions are coming out and saying maybe it's something about the 12th pick. I'd have to go back and check who else were notable 12th overall picks, but maybe there's something about the 12th pick that produces guys like this. And it's funny also because selecting Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams, maybe more so with Jahmyr Gibbs, the Detroit Lions got a lot of stick for drafting a running back that high, especially it being Jahmyr Gibbs, just because with the market of how running backs are now, thinking of even drafting a running back at 12 that high is crazy nowadays. No team would really ever consider it unless you're even talking about a Saquon or a Christian McCaffrey sort of talent. Maybe even the answer at that point would even still be a maybe of drafting them that high. But the Lions went ahead and did it, and Jahmyr Gibbs definitely impressed a lot of people as a rookie last year. Just to show you guys some of his stats that I have here to, show you guys and provide you, just to give you an idea of how well he performed. There you go and see it on your screen. In 2023, he recorded 1,261 yards from scrimmage, 11 touchdowns, and 5.2 yards per carry, which on paper, on just, seeing it like that, it might not seem like eye-popping numbers, generational type of numbers, but the way that I think he fits into this offense, and if he could provide, those are the numbers he provided as a rookie, complementing David Montgomery. Now, thinking of it in year 2, everybody's thinking of the possibility of what kind of monster Jahmyr Gibbs could be if he produced this in his first year, now with the experience, now with better training, and kind of knowing what an NFL season is like. And not only that, but knowing what it is like to play into January, to the latest stage of the season other than the Super Bowl. I think that would certainly help him out tremendously now heading into his second year, and people are already, salivating over what this guy could be in his second year. Talking about those yards per carry, firstly here, 5.2 is extremely high. You're in the range of some of the best runners in the NFL in that category. He was only behind Christian McCaffrey and Jaylen Warren for yards per carry. Both of them had about 5.4, 5.3. And now, not only is Jahmyr Gibbs a great runner, obviously, with his outside speed, zone speed that he brings to the Lions, very nicely complementing David Montgomery, but also his running in between the tackles, in between tight spaces, in between the line, certainly improved a lot as the season went on. And I think it was the game against the Rams or the Jaguars. I might be completely messing up whatever team that was, but there was a game in where he really broke out and was almost like his breakout game, and where you really saw the whole package with Jahmyr Gibbs, the running ability, the pass catching, everything in that game. He took over that game completely, and that was sort of his stamp of approval to show everybody that he's not only just this rookie that everybody, really had no hopes for, that he is a major piece to this offense. And again, only as a rookie. And now, heading into his second year, there's already talks of their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, wanting to maximize his talent and his potential even more. Not only as a running back, but potentially maybe lining him up in the slot and really taking advantage of his route running ability as a receiver, which is, tremendous for Jahmyr Gibbs if he could bring that to the table someday, put it on his resume, and, get himself maybe a larger contract because of that. That's only to Jahmyr Gibbs' benefit, and also to the Lions if they're able to take advantage of this with maybe the lack of wide receiver talent just at the start here. Lining up Jahmyr Gibbs as a wide receiver, having still David Montgomery in the backfield, will certainly be impressive to use that as a weapon in 2024. And I think now, just more so than ever, I think now the acknowledgement of Jahmyr Gibbs, realizing that he's not only a complementary piece to David Montgomery, to only spot him a few plays when David Montgomery gets tired, but also now to really look at Jahmyr Gibbs as a playmaker, as a go-to guy for this team in the passing game, out of the backfield, running it, and everything like that. He can almost do everything very well according to all this hype that he's getting, and I'm very excited to see it. I was one of those people that was skeptical of this pick, but as I watch the Lions closer and closer towards the postseason and things like that, he really is a guy that is a nightmare to, game plan against. He's super fast. He's strong for being, maybe a fragile, more agile running back. He can get in there and put his face mask into blockers, pick up, protections and, pass blocking situations like that. He can almost do it all. And again, he's so young. It is something to look forward to. And I'm buying into the hype a little bit now. I'm hyping up Jahmyr Gibbs a bit here now. But I truly believe that Jahmyr could take that next step. And on top of that, then you have a guy like Jameson Williams, and maybe not so well known just yet compared to Jahmyr Gibbs, just because he had to deal with a little bit more adversity as he started his NFL career. You look back to his rookie year, he only played 6 games, recovering from an ACL injury that he suffered in college, so already a rough start. But then in last season, he missed the first month because of a gambling suspension. So on the field and off the field, pretty rough starts for Jameson Williams. But more so last year, you kind of saw what he could be eventually if, he figured everything out and figured out how to maneuver your way through the NFL as a professional and as a true, playmaker for this team. You saw the deep ball threat that he provided, the quick speed that he had. The route running was on display as well last year, but again, he was still secondary or a third option to the Detroit Lions behind, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then you had Sam Laporta that just busted onto the scene out of nowhere. So now I think a lot more stock is being invested in Jameson Williams now, not only because Josh Reynolds moved on to the Broncos, but because this guy certainly shows flashes of the enormous talent that he could bring to this Lions team. And he was a first-round pick. The success that he had at Alabama as well, screams for him to be more productive for this Lions team. And offensive coordinator Ben Johnson also basically said, short and simple, he said, I haven't seen anything he can't do, so it's been fun, incorporating him into the offense more, maybe drawing up some plays specifically for him. If these two guys, get over that, hurdle of trying to really break out this year, potentially in 2024, then you get to the question, the overall idea of this Lions roster and the weapons they have at their disposal. Their disposal, you have guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams, if he takes that next step, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, their offensive line, which I think is the best in the NFL. Those are a lot of guys that the Lions can really just pick and choose, decide who's going to take over that game. And they really hit on every level of offense with 2 running backs, one of the best already tight ends in the NFL, one of the best receivers in the NFL, up and coming. And again, that offensive line is just mean. Their offensive line really just bullies you, and you saw it in the game against the 49ers. They were destroying them up front. The running game was absolutely insane in the first half, and then they went away from it, and they ended up losing that game. But that was sort of the epitome of this offensive line, of what they can be to some of the best teams in the NFL. And talking about some of the best teams, I think right now, before any football has been played, just on paper, the Lions are certainly up there with the Eagles and I think the 49ers as the top 3 best, offensive weapon groups that there is in the NFL currently. Maybe the Chiefs, you can say, are up there as the best team because they have the best player in the NFL in Patrick Mahomes. But in terms of weapons and who you have on your roster, I think really the Eagles, the 49ers, and the Lions now stand out. And more so, it is so close right now between all 3 of them. But if we get a season, like Jameson Williams doesn't have to put up like 1,200 yards or anything like that and 10 touchdowns. If he records like anywhere from 700 to 900 yards, anywhere from that range, maybe contribute with 5 or 6 touchdowns or something like that, and just improves and becomes a threat that other teams need to game plan for. And also with Jahmyr Gibbs, it's hard to exceed the kind of rookie season that he had, but if he does exceed it, he's going to be looked at as one of the best running backs, if not, arguably the best young running back in the NFL, with Breece Hall in there as well. You're going to have 2 guys that really complement this offense so much more. The Lions are screaming for somebody to kind of help out Amon-Ra St. Brown and take away some of the coverage that, slides over to his side. If you have Jameson Williams with his speed, his route running ability, then you have Sam Laporta over the middle, and Jahmyr Gibbs coming out of the backfield, the opposing defense gets very thin. They're stretched out too many different places to where you can really try to create a game plan to stop all of those guys. It's going to be extremely hard to do so. And the thing I love the most about this team, and I'll end this segment with this, is that the offensive line is one thing, but also the relentless style that they can have with both running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs and everything he's able to do out of the backfield, and then David Montgomery, who will just punish you in the hole, has sneaky good speed on the outsides of the offensive line. Having both of those guys and how they complement each other could just really keep opposing offenses with how high-powered they are on the sideline. You control the tempo of everything. And I think a lot of people forget last year that the Lions marched into Arrowhead in the first week of the season and beat the Chiefs at home pretty convincingly. Their defense stepped up, and their defense is one area that I would point as a weakness potentially compared to the other two teams. But overall on offense, if we're just talking offense to offense and matching the Chiefs point for point, I think the Lions, if they have these two guys step up, can be the team in the NFC to potentially stop the Chiefs from three-peating, making history, becoming the first team to three-peat in NFL history. So that's how I'm feeling about the Detroit Lions. That's how it seems like a lot of people are feeling in regards to Jameson Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs really being those two X factors that could get the Lions over the finish line here. They made it to the NFC Championship game last year, so that's already a high bar to meet, but they have all the pieces in place, so I think they're very capable of doing it. The Eagles are going to have something to say about it. Certainly the 49ers, but we'll see how the Brandon Aiyuk situation sort of plays itself out. But the NFC is an exciting conference. It's definitely more offensive based, where I think the AFC is a little bit more grueling and defensive based, but a lot of good football should be played in each conference. It should be something to watch in 2024, but we'll leave that there. We'll leave that to when the season actually starts. But now we're going to talk some more about the offseason and joint practices officially starting this week. We've had already some on Sunday, some on Monday, and some starting up today, with a few more starting up Thursday as well. There's already a lot of fights breaking out. We're going to go into that, what happened and how that all, sort of played itself out. And a potential scenario, could joint practices maybe be an alternative option to the preseason games, now going into an area where the NFL is trying to incorporate more regular season games? Could they use joint practices as a way to get rid of some of the preseason games? We're going to answer that question when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here now on the show to talk about what's been going on in the offseason, to kind of break up the monotony and just the grueling regimen of the offseason so far. This week was the official start of joint practices in and around the NFL, and some of the first training camp, joint practices already took place, going back to Sunday with the Los Angeles Rams and the Los Angeles Chargers sort of kicking off the festivities with having joint practices. Then yesterday we had the Lions and the New York Giants start their joint practices, and that one's been probably the most noteworthy of all the joint practices up until this point. Today we had the Dolphins and the Falcons going through a joint practice as well. And I think the rest will follow on Thursday, with the Rams again having some more joint practices, this time with the Dallas Cowboys, and the Washington Commanders having one with the New York Jets. Usually, why there's so many already now coinciding with the start of preseason is because teams usually like to plan it out that way to lead into that preseason game and just get a little bit more of a competitive aspect, some more of those competitive juices flowing in some of their players, where now, you kind of have a good understanding of what training camp is. You're going through your usual routine. You might be living somewhere else for the time being in terms of going somewhere else for training camp, so it could get a little lackadaisical. You want to keep guys on their toes, obviously, in such a time where a lot of these guys are fighting for positions, are fighting for roster spots, and it needs to be very competitive to do so. And how else would you do that by bringing on another team? And it's gotten pretty chippy in some of these instances, as it usually does, right? With the Detroit Lions and the New York Lions as well on Monday. They've gone in probably like 4 fights already throughout the 2 days that they've had joint practices, and they are one of the 30, or they're two of the 30 teams that are taking part in all of these joint practices. There's going to be a total of 22 this offseason, and the only teams that are not doing joint practices will be the Kansas City Chiefs and the Las Vegas Raiders in that same division. If they were to do it, you could probably guess that there would be a ton of fights between those two teams, just going back from last year as well. But with so many going on, and I think from just my knowledge of joint practices, this might be one of the years that I've seen basically everybody doing it. It usually feels like it's only a couple of teams taking part in it. Some teams that are familiar with each other, the head coaches are very familiar, former on the same coaching staff or something like that. It usually, to me, it seems like it plays out that way, but now I feel like more teams are starting to see the benefit of it, even though, again, the biggest negative of the entire situation is that you get fights like the ones we see with the Lions and the Giants. And just going through some of those, the negative side of it, just going back to the first day, right off the bat, you had Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown getting into it with the Giants quarterbacks, Dane Belton and Andrew Phillips. Some shoving, some pushing, some hands in opposing teams' faces, and just big scrums right off the bat in some of these practices. And the biggest fight was actually involving the guy that you don't want to get touched or don't want to do anything. You don't want anything to do with them getting in a fight. Happened with Daniel Jones, and it happened actually in a sort of sequence where the Giants were on offense. They were going through 11 and 11s, I want to say, and they were running through it. They had pads on, obviously, throughout this practice, and the play prior to the start of this fight, some Detroit Lions player, some defender, actually hit Daniel Jones, hit his arm a little bit, and that drew the ire of Brian Dable, being upset that somebody touched his quarterback. That's, the unwritten rule. Unwritten, everybody knows that you're not supposed to touch the quarterback, but somebody hit Daniel Jones, not too hard, but, teams get, sensitive about that. That's the quarterback. They're paying a lot of money to Daniel Jones. Don't touch the quarterback, right? But somebody hit his arm. There was a big, fuss made about it from Brian Dable, as you would expect. The next play happens, and it was a run play. Some offensive linemen get tied up together, and Daniel Jones, right out of the gate, jumps into the middle of the fight, and that sparks a whole other, issue there with the fight going on, with your quarterback being right in the middle of it. Not what you want to see if you're the Giants, but that continued on into the next day. Today, the Giants having another joint practice with the Lions, and you saw some more fights. Malik Neighbors getting into it with Kirby Joseph. Pretty intense up until this point, and you don't want two of your best players potentially getting hurt by throwing punches or, just being in the middle of a scrum and getting hurt inadvertently, something like that. So that's really the biggest negative. But even with that being the case, more teams, it seems like, are starting to do it now. And it could be something that I don't think would be crazy to suggest as a potential alternative going forward to maybe some of these preseason games. And why I think of it like this is because, the big cloud looms over the NFL on the potential of there being 18 games in the near future. And the biggest reason around 18 games and how it all really got started was because Roger Goodell brought up the fact that he would like to see more regular season games over preseason games. He said that that was an ideal scenario that he would always decide to choose, a regular season game over a preseason game, and they already chopped the amount of preseason games down to 3. Some teams have 4 if you play in the Hall of Fame game, but they already cut it down years before when they added another regular season game. But now, with the potential again to add an 18th game, I think if they're trying to find a solution, it wouldn't surprise me if they decided to maybe not make joint practices necessary, but just encourage, I guess you could say, for the NFL to encourage a lot of these teams to hold these joint practices. And you could see more and more teams, have these joint practices throughout the duration of the offseason, maybe a little bit earlier with some more frequency to kind of get the same sense of having a preseason game there day in, day out potentially. Now, of course, it brings the negative side of it. You have guys that you don't really have too much control over, if that makes sense. If you're bringing in a team to your facility, to where you're staying for training camp, yeah, you might have some more control because the coaches are everywhere. You're kind of running through controlled scenarios and controlled, scrimmages or something like that. But again, there's still that weird aspect of having guys that you're not really knowing on a personal level. But you can't have 3 preseason games really as the main focal point of this. You can't have 3 preseason games and then also tack on 18 regular season games on top of that. I don't think it would work out with the offseason changes that they want to implement as well from the NFLPA. So something has to give, and it seems like the preseason is almost undoubtedly going to be altered in some way, shape, or form. And already we all have some of the players, some of the more notable players not taking part in it. I saw Christian McCaffrey probably not playing in the preseason. Kirk Cousins rumored to not be playing. Aaron Rodgers, same thing. Daniel Jones wants to play, but I'm not sure the Giants will grant him that, permission. But there's already teams, opting out of playing in the preseason, and with joint practices happening, consecutively for a couple of days, it pretty much brings that element of having the preseason in a way. Some of the refs already show up, so you kind of have some guidance and some rules integrated to some of these joint practices. And also, you can't really hold out some of your main guys. I mean, you could, but if you have consecutive days of joint practices, you're not going to hold out your quarterback or your wide receiver for 3 consecutive days. They're going to be able to compete against opposing teams and players. So I think that way it could be seen as a more positive view for joint practices to kind of step in here and maybe be an alternative for the preseason. You bring out those other competitive juices, trying to keep it in a controlled sort of scenario as best as you can. But I think having more competition out there could probably bring out the best in some of the guys that are trying to make the roster. You think of those guys that are trying to make it on special teams, trying to make it as the backup quarterback, the 4th receiver on some team's roster. If they get an opportunity to play against, their teammates, it is impressive, but it gets to a point where it almost becomes, the same thing over and over again. If you put them up against, I don't know, maybe another team's best corner, another team's, 2nd or 3rd best defender or something like that, and they impress you, I think that creates a whole nother dynamic for trying to evaluate players in different scenarios against guys that are really trying to beat them in a controlled, competitive environment. But that's what really got me thinking about this. Joint practices starting up, it gets chippy, it gets heated right away, right off the bat, and you'd ideally like to control that more if you're the NFL, but it happens, and you get to see better plays, I believe. You get the best out of some of your guys, and it almost seems like more so than the preseason, it seems like guys try a little bit harder in some of these. You see how hard they go in these practices, in joint practices with some of the main guys out there practicing. You get the best out of them. Iron sharpens iron is thrown around a lot. I think it could be something that isn't completely insane for the NFL to consider, having more joint practices more frequently, maybe for 3 days in a row or something like that. Some certain scenarios where it could happen in the NFL, I believe, could be a good thing, especially when you have teams in the same city, the Jets and the Giants, maybe with Buffalo also included in there. The 49ers and the Rams and the Chargers are already doing it. Teams in Texas, with the Texans, the Cowboys. And you have so many scenarios where it could be ideal scenario for these teams to happen. And I don't know. I think it could be pretty interesting also to see how it all plays out. Maybe they'll play around with it. It seems like something that it is increasing over the last few years. So it's something that teams are comfortable with. But again, you have to manage the negative side of it and trying to limit the amount of fights that break out. But I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL considers it come next offseason, where I think we're going to see a lot of these big changes coming to the schedules and whatnot. But that's what I think of it. Let me know what you guys think. Also, do you think I'm pretty crazy suggesting this as an alternative, or do you value the preseason a little bit more than the NFL? And I evidently do as well. Leave your guys' thoughts in the comments section of this week's episode. But with that being the case, we're going to head to another break, and we have 2 more segments to talk about to close out this show. Davante Adams giving some more input on the quarterback battle between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, plus some news regarding the Washington Commanders. Jaden Daniels will start their first preseason game on Saturday. We're going to go into that decision to start Jaden Daniels and the Commanders still being pretty quiet on who their starting quarterback will be officially. Those 2 topics are coming up after this short break. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back here on the show to talk about the Las Vegas Raiders and their quarterback battle that is still going on through the 3rd week of training camp. It is an interesting one to sort of point out here, just because I feel like with the Raiders, they're one of the teams that don't get really enough of the spotlight and enough of the media attention nationally to, bring up as a constant competition that does matter a lot, not just because we're talking about the quarterback spot obviously being so impactful to the success of an NFL team, but because it does a lot to the relationship and the morale of possibly the most important player on the Raiders, being Davante Adams. And I say that because this offseason we've seen a lot of news and speculation about Davante Adams potentially leaving and being traded to the New York Jets, sort of sparking that flame, that itch of wanting to play with Aaron Rodgers yet again. And while I do know obviously that it does depend on the Raiders whether or not they decided to trade him at all, but it is something that it has been brought up, and especially after last season's, Netflix series of Receiver. Talking about last season, we saw throughout a bunch of scenarios and a bunch of episodes in that show how Davante Adams really reached a limit with the quarterback situation last year with the Raiders, of which I've never really seen him, be so emotional, be so upset in any scenario. Obviously, it was a lot better with the Packers playing with Aaron Rodgers, but even when things got tough, I've never seen him really react like that, cursing off the scenario, cursing off the plays, getting hit constantly, just being frustrated with the lack of production coming from the quarterback spot. Obviously, it all sort of died down a little bit when Antonio Pierce came in, when Jimmy Garoppolo was eventually, benched and they moved on from him, and really started going with Aiden O'Connell. It got a little bit better. The atmosphere sort of changed around the entire organization with Antonio Pierce being there, but now we head into this season still being unsure of what we're going to get out of that spot for the Las Vegas Raiders. And now it is a competition, a pretty even matchup between Gardner Minshew, who they signed this offseason, and Aiden O'Connell from last year. And on that topic, Davante Adams spoke with ESPN recently about the quarterback competition going on, and he said there's pros and cons to not having a timeline on this quarterback battle. But at the end of the day, we get enough reps with both guys, and we are all communicating on this topic. And he also, went on to talk about how he's really paying attention to this entire thing and to a lot of what Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell are doing just throughout practice. He said that he's got his antennas up for everything. He's trying to pick up on every little, nuance that goes into how Aiden O'Connell throws the ball, how it comes out of the hand of Gardner Minshew, how fast each ball is, the placement of everything. Davante Adams really stressed that he is really putting a lot of stock in a lot of these different aspects of quarterback play, because obviously this is going to be a major part in how successful they are in 2024. And the last thing you want, if you're a Raiders fan, if you're in that Raiders organization, is to have Davante Adams feeling like he did last year, almost so helpless out there that, tensions start to boil over and rumors popping up once again, a disgruntled wide receiver. And the Raiders, the last thing they need, obviously, is having distractions like that to their best player on their team. So it is critical that they get this situation, figured out. We've heard reports previously that Davante Adams actually preferred or thought that Aiden O'Connell had the lead up until this point in that quarterback battle, but now, just based on what he said, paying attention to everything so closely now, it seems like it could be a little bit more even. Now, that's not for sure. I haven't seen too many reports on Gardner Minshew, really improving or impressing a lot of people in the organization on how he could potentially overtake Aiden O'Connell in this. But going back to what Davante Adams said about the pros and the cons of having no timeline essentially for this quarterback battle, you look at some of those pros and cons, and you look at some of the positives of having this extended time with each quarterback. You get more time to really evaluate each guy and really make sure in all scenarios that they are the one quarterback that you believe can get you to improve in 2024. And then also, it's pretty even throughout the duration of, training camp. You don't have a guy that's designated for the ones, a guy that's designated for the number two, offense in training camp. You have both guys probably splitting the repetitions with the first team offense pretty evenly. So that's another thing that could benefit your understanding of who will end up being the quarterback. And then also, you give more time specifically to Gardner Minshew to sort of settle in, get to know the offense, and then really have a shot of trying to prove to the Raiders that he could potentially be that starting quarterback. But on the other side, the negative of it, splitting reps, I never am too big a fan of it, just because I believe you don't really get the ideal amount of chemistry with one guy knowing that he's going to be the guy to throw you the football all throughout 2024. You can't really work on perfecting the timing of everything with one guy just because you don't really know if he's going to end up winning the competition. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I think is pivotal to the negative side of this is that because you have so much time, it can be looked at as a positive, but also when you have too much time, almost it seems like you're really scrambling through everything. You have almost too much time to decide what makes one quarterback better than the other. And I just brought up a little comparison up here for you guys just to show you what we're sort of dealing with here with each guy in terms of production and yards and touchdowns and interceptions just off of last year. Minshew takes the lead in yards, in touchdowns as well, but also in interceptions. That's something to watch if he's going to be your starter. Aiden O'Connell played less games than Gardner Minshew, obviously with Anthony Richardson going down so early. Minshew got most of the reps throughout the entire year, but you could still look at those numbers and think that they are pretty close and relative to, depending on how many games that each quarterback played, it does make a difference. And what I believe now is trying to separate these two guys at least a little bit here going into the third week of training camp is that each of them brings something different that could make them the number one quarterback. You look at Gardner Minshew, he brings the experience coming from various different scenarios, but also Aiden O'Connell has a different sort of, experience with being on the Raiders already and also having that connection with Davante Adams already in place. That could give him the potential edge as well. But what's really, a driving point to all of this, I believe, is that everyone's talking about the starting quarterback, right? And that's the thing that matters most, obviously. But what I think is funny about these two guys is that not only does it matter who the starting quarterback is, it really matters a lot who the backup is in this situation, because if I'd explain it this way, I think that both of these guys feel very comfortable being the backup quarterback, and then if they're needed, they're able to, get in the mindset where they know they're the backup quarterback. They can go in there and be temporarily very good, or be at least adequate enough to be the starting quarterback for a set amount of time. And of course, Aiden O'Connell did it for a shorter amount of time last year than Gardner Minshew, but Gardner Minshew has almost built up his legacy, his resume of being a reliable backup that could come in and carry this offense, knowing that he might not be the guy going forward. And I don't know if that's exactly what their mindset is, but usually the scenarios that each of these quarterbacks have found themselves in is that they are the backups. They come in knowing that there's not that much pressure on them because they know they're the backup, right? If that makes sense. So I think finding out who the backup quarterback is could be just as important, almost, not completely at the same level, but almost as important as who the starter is, just because, say it's Aiden O'Connell who you decide is a starter, and he doesn't play that well in the regular season. If you decide to bench Aiden O'Connell early on and sort of give up on him early on, you bring in Minshew, then you can't really go back on that decision to bring in Aiden O'Connell back in, even if Minshew doesn't really impress you that much more. I fear that because they haven't been in this scenario too often, being benched and being in a spot where you get your dream scenario, right? You're the starting quarterback, but then you get benched. We've never seen these guys in those scenarios where they deal with it at all. So we don't know if they're going to deal with it in a positive way. If you bench Aiden O'Connell and kind of swing and take a big blow of his ego, of his personal morale, it could affect him going forward. And then if Gardner Minshew isn't as that much better than Aiden O'Connell, then you have a real scenario where you don't really know what to do, whether you bring back Aiden O'Connell. Is he too messed up morally to come back after being benched? Or the same way goes with Gardner Minshew and, vice versa, trying to bring him back in after benching him. I think that's a pretty niche scenario where the backup quarterback definitely doesn't matter in this scenario as well for the Raiders. And trying to figure all of this out, it's going to take time. The preseason games are going to let us know a lot more on who's really ready to step into that lead role. But I assume they're going to get a bunch of split carries once the preseason starts. So we'll talk about that more as the week goes on. Again, a reminder, the first weekend of the preseason is happening this upcoming weekend. And on that note, we're going to transition to the last topic on today's show on the preseason, again, talking about Jayden Daniels being named the starter to start in that preseason game on Saturday. We're going to go into that, what head coach Dan Quinn had to say about it, but also why they haven't named officially a starting quarterback yet up until this point. They've been kept pretty quiet about it, and we're going to speculate why that is. After this short break, we'll be right back. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, talking some more about the preseason now that we're counting down the days to finally having some more football back. We already got a little taste of it in the Hall of Fame game last week on Thursday, and now we're looking towards this upcoming weekend where there will be entire slate of preseason games going on from Thursday all the way through Sunday. And one of those games that I'm sure a lot of people have penciled in, at least I do, is the one on Saturday between the Commanders and the New York Jets. And Jayden Daniels, the number 2 overall selection in this year's draft, being named the starter in that Saturday matchup against the New York Jets. According to head coach Dan Quinn, he revealed that Daniels will be the starter. He didn't say whether or not, how much he'll play and how much, the split of reps will be with Marcus Mariota potentially, if he even plays, or it could be Sam Hartman in there as well, the third-string quarterback, maybe playing some more if Marcus Mariota doesn't play. But at this point, I would feel like Marcus would play just to earn himself that spot over Jayden Daniels, because then it kind of transitions into this bigger point of technically the Commanders haven't named a starter yet for the regular season, going forward. In the unofficial depth chart that has been released today, we have seen that Jayden Daniels is the starter based on that depth chart, but usually those depth charts aren't really, published by the coaches more often than not. They're usually published by the website and, people in charge of the PR and things like that. They're usually done by, the people in charge of that. So it's not like Dan Quinn, set it already as the official, list and order of who's going to be the starter come week 1. So I think that's a little bit odd. I think some people find it a little bit odd that, the Commanders haven't really done so because of how everything was built up with Jayden Daniels. He is the Heisman winning quarterback. He's an experienced quarterback at that, spending some more time in college than some of these other guys. And up until this point, you would guess, at least I would guess, that Jayden Daniels was going to be the starter because he was selected so high. With the scenario that the Commanders are facing now, they traded away Sam Howell, and they relinquished the opportunity to trade out of that pick because they like Jayden Daniels so much. So all of that wrapped into one, I assumed that this was just a foregone conclusion that he was going to be named the starter up until this point. But that hasn't been the case just yet. Jayden Daniels doesn't feel, any way slighted by this. He said that he trusts the Commanders fully and that he's only focused on getting better up until this point. But with looking at the other quarterbacks and trying to, kind of compare the scenarios, you have some of the quarterbacks drafted in the first round that are not going to be the starters, right? Thinking of Michael Penix and Drake May and J.J. McCarthy are probably the first-round quarterbacks that are not going to be starters. You almost know that 100% guaranteed. And that really leaves Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, and Jayden Daniels as the guys that are pretty much up in the air, other than Caleb Williams, because he's definitely going to start. Something catastrophic would have to happen for Caleb not to start. So he's going to be the starter. But then you have Bo Nix and Jayden Daniels sort of in the same scenario. But with Jayden, I feel like because it is almost so evident and so much in your face that this job almost has to be his, I feel like, what is the reason that Dan Quinn has for not, already designating Jayden Daniels as the starter? And you look at it, comparing it against some of these other scenarios with these quarterbacks, I believe that he should start, but he's certainly not in the best situation compared to Caleb or sort of J.J. McCarthy in a way where you have this entire support system around him. You feel good about starting a rookie quarterback, so you can feel the need to designate them as the starter because you have the confidence that they're going to be successful because of the job that you have done in the offseason to find the players, the support that they need on the offensive line, all the wide receivers that the Bears brought in. They feel comfortable throwing a rookie quarterback out there for that reason being. But where the Commanders sort of deviate a little bit, even though, again, it's so obvious that Jayden should be the starter, if you look at the scenario that the Commanders face now, even though the competition with Marcus Mariota might not be the toughest in terms of who this rookie is competing against, you look at JJ competing with Sam Darnold, I think that poses a bigger challenge. Bo Nix competing with Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson, two guys that have been in the NFL already, and Jarrett Stidham was the starting quarterback last year, so I would deem that also as a bigger challenge. And elsewhere as well, Kirk Cousins with Michael Penix, Drake May with Jacoby Brissett. Marcus Mariota against Jaden Daniels doesn't seem to be too close of a competition. Ideally, if it goes all the way that the Commanders think it should, play out. No shade to Marcus Mariota, but that's just, the matter of fact. At this point in Marcus Mariota's career, I think Jaden right away is ready to start in terms of competition, and also why I believe could be the reason that Dan Quinn hasn't, designated a starter just yet, just based on my intuition and trying to find a reasoning for it, is because you don't want any added pressure basically on Jaden Daniels at a point here in training camp where ideally none of these games really matter. How you play in training camp doesn't really matter. But if you have Jaden Daniels, say they named Jaden Daniels the starter in mandatory minicamp or something like that, then every little thing that Jaden did well, Jaden did all right, and Jaden did poorly would be so dissected so closely by everybody in the media, by everybody talking about Jaden Daniels, about this decision to start Daniels right off the get-go. Everything would be put under a microscope and overanalyzed leading up to the first game of the regular season, where nobody's an end product by the first week. Certainly not rookie quarterbacks. There's definitely going to be a lot of bumps and learning curves from the start of the regular season to December, and then towards the end of the season, depending on where the Commanders are. It's not going to look perfect by any means, but right away, you don't want all the heat coming from the national media on the Washington Commanders. If you have a rookie quarterback, the last thing you want to do is put all this added pressure on him, put all these expectations on him that are unrealistic oftentimes, and just do Jaden Daniels or any other rookie quarterback no good, honestly, by trying to overcompensate and overanalyze any little comment that is made about them and trying to prove all those critics wrong. It usually doesn't lead them to developing in the best way, shape, or form. And I think I saw today the clip from Hard Knocks, funny enough, how Nick Saban was talking to Matt Eberflus about Caleb Williams and the expectations on a rookie quarterback, and basically saying the same thing, how a lot of times unrealistic expectations are placed on these quarterbacks, and when they try to prove everybody wrong, when they try to meet these impossible expectations, that's when the development is sort of, thrown in the back seat and not really paid attention to as much as it should. You want to see almost these quarterbacks mess up to try and get them to learn from these situations, and that's why I believe Jaden hasn't really been given the keys to the castle already right off the bat, just because of that aspect of wanting them to learn, wanting them to feel okay to mess up in certain scenarios where they're not going to get killed for it and they're not going to fear, getting benched or having everybody turn on them. I think it's a good way of going about it. But again, it's just weird because it's so obvious. I feel like that Jaden is going to be the starter, but I think Dan Quinn is just keeping it traditional, just keeping it the way that he likes to do it, and I can't really knock that. But with how these preseason games go, certainly it's going to tell us a lot of where Jaden Daniels is. He could kill it, he could do awful, but again, I don't think it really matters up until this point, and it shouldn't matter in terms of expectations for these young quarterbacks. But hopefully he does play out well. He's going to be the second first-round quarterback to play. Drake May is also going to play in the preseason in the first game. He's not going to start, but we're going to see Drake May play on Thursday, and then it'll be Jaden Daniels and most likely Caleb Williams as well in Saturday's matchup for the Chicago Bears. But that's pretty much the update on Jaden Daniels. He will start in Saturday's game against the New York Jets. We're not going to see Aaron Rodgers, unfortunately. We might not see any of their starters. But it should be something to tune into. I'm certainly going to check it out, seeing how all these young guys do, just because I like seeing it. I like watching the preseason, oddly enough. You guys might think it's weird, but I'm itching for football to start again, and this is the closest thing we got to the NFL coming back. We're very close to the start of the regular season, so the start of the preseason is just another milestone we can get through until we have the NFL back up on our screens. But with that being the case, that'll wrap it up for today's show. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, for a lot of different ways to watch all this NFL content on your screen. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions and storylines across the NFL, discussing it with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you for joining me once again, and I hope to see you guys back here joining me again tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.